Some people are born out of love. Some are born out of accidents. And some are born out of a story so complicated that even the people living inside it don't know how to explain it. For the longest time, I believed my life was normal. Maybe not perfect, but normal enough. A quiet father, a deeply religious mother, a home where certain questions were never asked, and certain answers were never given. I didn't know that silence itself can be a language. I didn't know that some truths aren't hidden because they're small, but because they're too heavy to carry. Growing up, I always felt like there was something unfinished about my family. Like a chapter had been ripped out before I ever got a chance to read it. My father loved me, but there was distance in his affection. Not coldness, restraint, as if he was always careful with how much of himself he allowed to exist in the present. My mother, on the other hand, believed in forgiveness the way some people believe in gravity. Quietly, firmly, without needing to prove it. As a child, I never questioned how two people so different ended up together. I never asked how they met. I never wondered why there were no old photographs, no romantic stories about their early days. I assumed they were private people. I was wrong. There was a reason my existence felt like an unanswered question. A reason my father carried guilt like a shadow. A reason my mother's faith wasn't soft, but earned. Because before my father was my father, he was someone else. Before my mother was my mother, she was a minister walking into a prison. And before I was a child, I was something no one expected to happen. My father was married before. Not once, but twice. By the time he was with his second wife, life looked stable on the outside. He had work, responsibilities, a routine that involved traveling frequently, long absences that required trust, or at least the illusion of it. What no one prepares you for is the moment when trust collapses instantly. No warning, no gradual unraveling, just one door opening at the wrong time. One night, my father came home earlier than planned. No suspicion, no doubt, just a man returning to what he thought was his life. And what he walked into changed everything. That night didn't just end a marriage. It ended a version of my father that would never exist again. It set off a chain of events that would lead to blood, prison bars, forgiveness, and eventually, me. I am not telling this story to shock you. I'm telling it because this is what happens when love, betrayal, rage, and faith collide in the real world, not in movies, not in fiction, but in lives that have to keep going afterward. This is the story of a man who committed an unforgivable act. A woman who chose to see the human behind it. And a child born from a place where hope wasn't supposed to survive. This is my story. He didn't suspect anything that day. That's the part people don't understand when they imagine betrayal. They think there are signs, intuition, a feeling in the gut. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes life feels completely ordinary right up until the moment it isn't. My father had been traveling again. Airports, hotels, meetings that blurred together. When he came home earlier than planned, it wasn't to test his wife or catch her in something. It was just timing, chance, one small change in schedule that altered everything. The house was quiet when he walked in. Too quiet, maybe, but not enough to raise alarms. He set his things down, moved through familiar rooms, his mind still half somewhere else. There was no anger in him yet. No fear, just the simple expectation of home. Then he opened the bedroom door. People always ask what the first emotion is in moments like that. Rage, shock, pain. But the truth is, the first emotion is confusion. Your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. Another man, his bed, his wife, a reality that doesn't fit the life you thought you were living. He didn't shout. He didn't attack. He didn't even speak. He turned around and walked out. That walk down the hallway was longer than anything he'd ever experienced. Every step was a decision waiting to be made. He could leave the house. He could call someone. He could pretend he never saw it. But betrayal has a way of hijacking logic. It turns hurt into something heavier, something dangerous. He went back into the room with a gun. What followed happened fast and slow at the same time. The kind of moment that lives forever in fragments. A sound, a body falling, blood where love was supposed to be. One life ended instantly, another permanently damaged. When it was over, the room was silent again, but not the same silence as before. This one screamed. My father didn't run. There was nothing left to run from. He had already destroyed everything that mattered. He called the police and waited. Sat there with the weight of what he had done pressing down on his chest. He was arrested without resistance. No excuses, no justifications. He didn't say it was an accident. He didn't say he lost control. He told the truth. The court later called it a crime of passion. A phrase that sounds almost sympathetic, almost human. But standing in front of a judge doesn't undo a death. The sentence came down heavy. 10 years in a maximum security prison. Prison isn't just steel doors and concrete walls. It's identity erasure. From the moment you enter, your name stops mattering. You become a number, a charge, a story everyone already thinks they understand. My father went from husband to inmate overnight. From a man with a future to a man with a sentence. And inside those walls, time doesn't heal anything. It only forces you to sit with yourself. Days became routines, countless hours locked inside his own thoughts. The night replayed again and again. The door opening, the realization, the decision, the gunshot. He didn't sleep easily. He didn't forgive himself. He didn't expect anyone else to either. Other inmates saw him for what his file said he was. A murderer. Some respected that, some despised it, but none of them saw the full story. Not that it would have changed anything. Years passed, slowly, painfully, and somewhere during those years, something inside him shifted. Not redemption, not peace, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying guilt every single day without relief. It was during that phase of his sentence, when anger had burned itself out and left only emptiness, that the prison ministry program expanded. New volunteers, new faces, people who came not to judge, but to listen. That's when my mother walked in. She didn't know him yet. Didn't know his story. She wasn't there for him specifically. She was there because she believed even the worst people deserved to be heard. Their first conversations were short, controlled, professional. He didn't trust kindness anymore. Kindness had failed him once already. But she didn't push. She asked questions and waited for real answers. Eventually, he told her the truth. He expected disgust, fear, distance. She didn't offer any of those. She listened, and in a place built to punish, that simple act changed everything. Their conversations were never meant to become anything more than that. At least, that's what both of them told themselves in the beginning. He was an inmate. She was a minister. There were rules, boundaries, lines drawn thick and clear, and yet, life has a way of moving quietly underneath the rules, finding cracks no one expects. At first, my father spoke to her the way he spoke to everyone inside those walls, carefully, sparingly, without emotion. He had learned that showing too much of yourself in prison was dangerous. Vulnerability could be used against you. But my mother didn't respond like the others. She didn't interrogate. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't rush him toward forgiveness like it was an obligation. She let silence exist. That was new for him. Silence that wasn't threatening. Silence that didn't demand anything. Over time, that silence became space. And in that space, words started to come out that he had buried even from himself. He told her about the night. Not just the facts, but the feeling. The moment he realized his life was over before it actually was. The weight of the gun in his hand. The second where he could have turned around and didn't. He didn't ask for absolution. He didn't ask to be understood. He just told the truth. My mother didn't excuse him. That part matters. She never said what he did was right. She never tried to turn his pain into justification. She acknowledged the harm, the loss, the permanence of it, but she also acknowledged him. In a place where people were reduced to their crimes, she spoke to the person who existed before and after that moment. She reminded him that remorse meant something. That accountability didn't erase humanity. That even broken people were still people. That idea scared him more than punishment ever had. Because punishment is easier than hope. Punishment has rules. Hope asks something of you. Hope demands change. Weeks turned into months. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, less guarded. He found himself waiting for the days she came in, not because he felt entitled to her presence, but because those moments made the rest of the week survivable. He noticed things about her. The way she listened without interrupting. The way her voice softened when someone spoke honestly. The way she carried faith not as a weapon, but as a responsibility. She wasn't there to save anyone. She was there to walk beside them. My mother noticed things too. The way my father never minimized what he'd done. The way he flinched at certain memories. The way guilt sat on him like something physical, heavy and constant. She saw a man who had destroyed his own life and lived every day knowing it. She should have kept her distance. She knew that, but compassion doesn't always arrive with clean edges. Sometimes it blurs lines quietly, without announcing itself. Sometimes it feels like concern before it feels like attachment. Sometimes you don't realize you've crossed a boundary until you're already standing on the other side of it. Their connection grew in a place where physical touch was almost non-existent. It grew through words, through shared silences, through vulnerability, through the slow realization that someone else was seeing you fully and still choosing not to turn away. That realization changes people. My father began to reflect differently. Not about the sentence, but about who he was becoming inside it. He started attending programs, reading, writing, not because he expected freedom, but because he didn't want to rot into the worst version of himself. My mother struggled with her own conflict. She questioned her role, her intentions, her faith. Loving someone inside prison felt wrong and inevitable at the same time. She knew what people would think if they found out. She knew the labels that would follow her. She also knew she couldn't pretend the connection wasn't real. Eventually, the truth had to be spoken, not dramatically, not in a moment of passion, just honestly. They acknowledged what had grown between them. And in doing so, they stepped into something dangerous. Not illegal, not hidden, but deeply complicated. Their relationship moved forward slowly, under scrutiny, under rules, under the constant awareness that one of them would eventually leave that place and the other wouldn't, at least not yet. Then something happened that neither of them had planned for. A conjugal visit, a sanctioned moment, brief, controlled, intended to preserve family bonds, not create new ones. A moment that exists on paper but carries consequences far beyond the walls it happens inside. That moment is where my life began. A child conceived in a place built to deny freedom. A life created in the middle of guilt, faith, and forbidden love. Neither of them knew it yet. But once it happened, there was no going back. They didn't find out right away. Life inside and outside prison doesn't move on the same timeline. Days blur together in there. Weeks pass without markers. And for my mother, the first signs were easy to dismiss. Stress, fatigue, emotional exhaustion. Loving someone in prison takes more out of you than people realize. But when the truth finally became impossible to ignore, it didn't arrive with joy. It arrived with fear. A child changes everything. A child doesn't care about intentions or circumstances. A child doesn't fit neatly into moral debates. A child is simply real. And suddenly, their complicated connection had become something permanent. My mother sat alone with that knowledge for a long time before she told my father. She knew what it meant. Not just emotionally, but socially, spiritually, practically. She was a prison minister, pregnant by an inmate convicted of murder. There was no version of that story that would be easy to explain. When she finally told him, my father didn't speak for a long time. Not because he didn't care, but because the weight of it nearly crushed him. A life, created by him, after he had taken one. The irony was brutal, the responsibility overwhelming. He was still inside, still serving time, still unable to protect, provide, or even hold the child he had helped create. He felt unworthy of it, terrified of it, afraid that history would repeat itself through him in some way he couldn't control. He told her he would understand if she walked away. She didn't. She chose to carry both the child and the consequences of that choice. She faced judgment from people who had once praised her faith. Questions that sounded polite but carried accusation. Some doors closed quietly. Some relationships faded without explanation. Faith, it turns out, is celebrated most when it's abstract. When it becomes personal, people get uncomfortable. My father served out the remainder of his sentence knowing a child was coming into the world he wasn't yet allowed to be part of. He wrote letters, long ones, careful ones, letters filled with apology before love, with accountability before hope. He never promised to be perfect. He promised to be present. When he was released early for good behavior, the world didn't welcome him back. A conviction like his never really ends. It follows you into job interviews, neighborhoods, conversations. It lives in records and whispers and the way people pause when they learn who you are. But he was free. Free to meet the child who had existed first as an idea, then as a responsibility, and finally as a living, breathing person. Me. I don't remember that moment, but I've imagined it enough times that it feels like memory. A man holding a child with hands that once ended a life. A man, learning to be gentle again, careful again, afraid again, but in a different way. Our home was not loud. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices or explosive arguments. There was caution, intention, an unspoken agreement to never take peace for granted. I grew up without knowing the full truth. I knew my father had made mistakes. I didn't know what kind. I knew my mother believed deeply in forgiveness. I didn't know why it mattered so much to her. And yet, somehow, the past still lived in our house. In the way my father avoided conflict. In the way my mother prayed longer than necessary. In the way both of them looked at me sometimes, like they were trying to understand how something so complicated had turned into something so fragile. They never lied to me. They just waited, because some truths aren't meant to be given all at once. I didn't find out all at once. There was no dramatic confession, no single night where everything came crashing down. The truth arrived the way it usually does in real life, slowly, unevenly, through fragments that didn't make sense until they finally did. I was old enough to notice things by then. The way conversations stopped when I entered the room. The way my parents exchanged looks that carried entire histories without words. The way my father reacted to news stories about violence, turning the volume down, leaving the room. The way my mother never spoke about forgiveness lightly, never treated it like a slogan. One day, I asked a question I hadn't planned to ask. Something simple, something about how they met. And for the first time, they didn't deflect. They told me the truth the only way it could be told, without drama, without excuses, without trying to protect themselves from how it might change the way I saw them. My father spoke about the night that ended a life. My mother spoke about the prison, the ministry, the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. And then they told me about me. That I was conceived during a conjugal visit. That my life began inside a prison. That my existence was never part of anyone's plan. I remember sitting there, trying to breathe normally, trying to understand how something so dark could be connected to me. How love and violence could exist in the same story. How my father could be both the man who taught me kindness and the man who pulled a trigger. How my mother could be both compassionate and controversial, faithful and flawed. It took time to stop seeing myself as a mistake. What I eventually learned is that I am not the product of betrayal alone. I am the product of what came after it. Of accountability. Of consequences faced instead of avoided. Of a woman who believed people were more than their worst acts, and a man who spent the rest of his life trying to prove she wasn't wrong. My father never asked to be forgiven by the world. He didn't try to rewrite his past. He lived quietly, responsibly, aware that some things can never be undone. My mother never claimed moral superiority. She lived with the weight of her choices and accepted the judgment that came with them. And me, I live knowing that life is messy. That people are capable of terrible things and incredible change. That love doesn't always start clean, but it can still end honest. I am not proud of how my story began. But I am not ashamed of it either. Because I exist, and I choose what comes next.